At long last, the echoes of the big shakeup in FDM printing finally hits this channel. What we're looking at here is the K1C from Creality, a hot noodle squirter, and basically a clone of this thing from what I've heard. And that printer there made all the little 3D printer manufacturers shit their pants not that long ago. And the K1C here is Creality's response, or rather redo, since their first battle cry, the K1, was allegedly plagued with issues. I have no experience with that machine, but Creality still sent me one all the same. I just hadn't got around to it yet. But now here we are with the fix, V2. So I suppose I shouldn't even bother with the K1. Maybe I can do a giveaway on my Discord with it or something. But that would have to be Australia only. I don't think I can afford to send this thing internationally. Anyway, turns out all the audio I recorded here was trash. Still haven't quite mastered capturing audio on the fly, apparently. So you're getting this little script instead. Maybe it's for the best. So this printer makes a lot of firsts for me in regards to FDM printers. It's the first fully enclosed printer I've tried. It's also the first that's come ready to print out of the box without any assembly required. Well, except for this itty bitty door handle. It's also the first Core XY printer I've had in here, so should be capable of fast and accurate printing. Although FL Sun beat them to the punch for fast printing, at least in this studio. But this machine, unlike the V400, can actually do input shaping out of the box, which is kind of cool. So let's talk about the experience of getting this thing set up, and I'll recount some highlights from the day for you here, and maybe one or two gripes as well. You pull it out of the box, remove a bunch of foam, clean up a bunch of annoying residue from this sticky tape, unscrew 3 bolts that hold the build plate down, bolt on the door handle, attach this adhesive rubber strip to this one side of the plastic top cover for some reason, and that's pretty much it. It's ready to go. You power it on. It reminds you to do all of the aforementioned steps in case you ignored the instructions up to this point. You then connect to Wi-Fi using a very lovely and responsive touchscreen, at which point it can now be accessed on your home network via a web browser on your PC or phone. Here you can remotely control the printer and send jobs to it. There's an exclude object feature built in, which is epic. So if you're printing multiple parts and one of them fails, but all of the others are still printing fine, you can just tell it to stop printing that one failed part. The printer comes with some pre-sliced files on board, so I printed a couple of those off, starting with the 600mm a second test print. If we had usable audio, this is where you would hear me gushing over how good this wall quality is, but also speculating that that quality might not carry through to more complex prints, which turned out to be the case, as here's the Benchy printed directly after in roughly 16 minutes, and as you can see it's definitely a little rougher, but still totally acceptable. Not a bad Benchy at all, actually. This is eSun PLA Plus High Speed. Bought some of this recently, and I'm keen to give it a go. Also, I forgot to mention that loading filament was a bit confusing. There's a filament runout sensor on the back, and a long length of PTFE tube that you feed the filament up and into. This part's pretty straightforward, but once the filament hits the print head, now you need to load it from the menu. Rather than options that say load and unload, Creality have instead labeled it extrude and retract, which threw me for a second. I got there in the end though, and this particular filament is a lovely dark bluish grey. Perfect, I dare say, for some wargaming terrain. Speaking of terrain, let's talk about funding these videos.
Fabricator's Lair. Artificer's Mini. Caleb makes minis. Dungeons and Dreadnoughts. Imp 3D Sion. Moid. And Scoutcifer Studio.
All of these talented artists have donated STL files to the Once in a Six membership this month, so supporters of the channel can enjoy these epic prints, plus a bunch of extra cool stuff that's available year-round from our welcome pack, including these epic tanks from Synergy Studio, and my plain tabletop gaming base pack, which is completely pre-supported for resin, but I think is better printed in FDM personally, but whatever you prefer, you can print it in either fashion and get the most fashionable results. Head to buymeacoffee.com/onceinaSixside or patreon.com/onceinaSixside and help keep this channel going. Get some cool STL files, and of course you'll get access to our most awesome Discord server where we are hosting print and paints every month with fun minis just like these. If today's not the day you can become a member, that's totally cool too. Instead, why don't you check out these artists using their links in the video description and give them a follow. They each produce outstanding work. You can also drop a comment on this video and say something like, man, this channel's Patreon sure is tempting, or damn, I really should sub to that Buy Me a Coffee page, huh? So this awesome set of Gothic terrain was kindly donated by Fabricators Lair and is my first choice for a big print here using the K1C printer. So there we go, looks like that's all the pieces there. Holy shit, that's fantastic. Dude, nice. Alright, yes, love this. I'm gonna print up some of these right now. While printing this terrain, I noticed that the K1C has a brilliant LED light inside so you can see nice and clearly what's being printed, but I also noticed that the fan noise was constantly ramping up and down, and it was kind of annoying to be working in the same room as this printer. I checked the settings and could see the fan speed jumping anywhere between 50 and 100%. This is hopefully something that we can control in the slicer, and speaking of the slicer, this is Creality Print, which looks to share the same DNA as Creality's Hallett Box slicer. I'm using this because I always, when I can, like to use whatever slicer the manufacturer includes with the printer. I don't know about you, but when I get an FDM printer as a tabletop gamer interested in printing terrain and other gaming pieces, I just want this thing to come out of the box with everything I need and be ready to go. And actually, this printer so far is achieving exactly that. I'm impressed. While that plate of terrain was chugging along, I couldn't help but feel I wasn't getting that speedy 600mm a second that Creality showed off earlier with those fancy pre-sliced models, and sure enough, checking their profiles in the slicer, I could see it was set to only 300mm a second on their normal profile, and the only other included profile is a high quality profile, which would be even slower. So where is the high speed option? I sent my contact at Creality an email about this, and I'll let you know later on in this video if they get back to me. As someone who feels like changing any of the myriad settings associated with an FDM printer will instantly lead to terrible print quality and all the failures, I don't quite have the confidence to try configuring a high-speed profile myself, at least for now. But I will at least try changing these settings here, and hopefully that solves my complaint about the fan noise. We'll see. So this first print finished roughly 20 hours later, and the parts held on well and nothing failed. This is a beautiful looking print, if a little stringy, but that was pretty easily dealt with using a lighter. I am so far very impressed with this printer, this terrain, and this dark grey filament almost makes these look like they came off sprues when you hold them at arm's length. Stoked. After that first success, I was feeling pretty daring, so I decided to try printing this awesome model here, the Trench Light Rig from Scout Surfer Studio, also available this month for Once in a Six Side channel members. And I gotta say, this Creality slicer here has generated some of the weirdest auto supports I've ever seen in my life. I have got to try printing this and see what comes out the other side. A few hours later, and I was greeted by this monstrosity here, and to my absolute amazement, there were usable parts inside. It was a bit of a fight to get them out of there, not because the supports were fused or anything, they actually were pulling away quite easily. It was just that they were so completely encapsulating to the point they were wrapped around small details like pipes that just made it so fiddly. And unfortunately, a couple of those pipes did break as I was removing these supports, but overall, amazing. Obviously, there are far superior auto supports out there for FDM, like tree supports, or even just controlling the settings better, I'm sure would make things easier here and produce a lot less waste. But if nothing else, this is pretty cool. By this point, Creality had got back to me and assured me that if I just increase the print speed setting here on the normal profile up to 600mm a second, that it will give me the same results as the pre-sliced files included with the printer. A quick way I thought to verify this would be to slice a benchy and see if mine also came out to 16 minutes, and yeah. That's not the same at all. For now though, I decided to try printing a base for this mech, and I was able to print this off in just 7 minutes. Kind of, because one of the things I've noticed with this printer is it actually takes a few minutes before it actually begins printing. Even if you've already brought it up to temperature, it does this whole pre-print procedure thing where it moves around a bunch before it finally starts printing. And while this probably won't be a grievance most of the time, it would be particularly annoying in instances like this, where you're just running off a small quick print. Out of curiosity, I decided to time this procedure, and it came in at just under 5 minutes. That's almost as long as it took to print the base itself. So maybe there's a way to disable this somewhere in the slicer, but I couldn't find it. Let's take a break now for a little while from the K1C and get some paint on these minis to see just how practical this stuff is really for our hobby. Plus, I really just feel like painting. It's been a few weeks since I did those 75mm sculpts, and I really enjoyed doing those a lot, so it's time to paint again. Many of you asked about this airbrushing booth last time it showed up here, and for good reason. It's a very impressive looking thing on camera, but let me tell you, if you want to buy one of these, you better be damn well sure you've got the space for it, because it is a girthy unit, and a heavy one too, once you've got it filled up with all the water it needs for that fancy waterfall feature. It is awesome though. If you can get the waterfall to fall consistently, sometimes you got to persuade it, but when it works, it's brilliant. But there's one part of this whole booth that I like more than anything, and it's this turntable. This thing is lovely. I didn't realize just how big a boon this would be to airbrushing, and if nothing else, I recommend you just find yourself one of these. I'll see if I can find this as a standalone purchase and drop a link in the description for you. But yeah, overall, this thing is very nice. It's made by Gallery, or Galeri, who knows? And I'll leave a link to it in the video description. I've been testing out their products for a few months now, and I've really fallen in love with this trigger airbrush with the 0.5mm needle. It has been a solid workhorse of a brush, and you can see it in just about all of my videos over the past year. Highly recommend it. Link in the description for that too, of course. I started off by priming everything in black using STL Res primer. I've nearly finished off 2 bottles of this stuff at this point, and after trying Vallejo, Pro Acryl, Scale 75, and Army Painter primers too, I rate this one the highest. It has just never jammed on me, and so it's just effortless to use. I've heard some people have issues with the STL Res jamming after it's aged a few months, but I can happily say I have not encountered that issue at all. Highly recommend it if you can get it. Otherwise, go with Scale 75 next, followed by Vallejo, then Pro Acryl, and don't waste your money on Army Painter primer. It'll give your airbrush cancer. But do buy a bunch of these. This is Army Painter Air Matte White, and holy shit, this is the best white for airbrushing zenithal highlights ever, period, the end. Inks suck because they can misbehave with subsequent layers and ruin your whole paint job. Not worth it. Just pick up a couple of these, you'll be more than happy with it. So anyway, I finally jumped on the bandwagon and picked up one of these Vortex mixers, and I figured this would be a good time to try some of the more opaque and pigmented V2 speed paints that Army Painter introduced. You can see just how separated these have become after they've been sitting a while. And can confirm, these things work and make shaking up paint way easier. Not a necessary purchase though by any means, more just a nice to have, but yeah, glad I picked this up. This is Ancient Honey that I decided to spray all over these ruins here, and Algae Green for the Walker. The ruins are looking pretty great so far with that nice gradient in brightness from top to bottom, but the effect was a little less obvious on the mech, with that green looking almost like a base coat. I then decided to pick out a bunch of details on the mech using Vallejo Metal Color Copper, and this paint really blew me away with how well it covers. I think this might just be the best copper paint I've ever used. And then at long last, it's time for me to try out this dirty down rust stuff that everyone's been raving about. I recently was able to pick up some of this and have been looking for an excuse to slap this all over something, and all the metal panels and features of these ruins would be the perfect playground, I thought. This was going to be a bit of a slog though to paint all these details in, but thankfully I had some help, and we were able to get all of these done in about an hour. And then I waited, and I waited, and I waited some more, until finally a day later I concluded, this stuff has not worked. I don't know if it's my base coats or the layer lines, the application or what, but I mixed it well and I applied it liberally in some areas and thinly in others, and I can't see any of that awesome rust effect that other people seem to get with this stuff. All I got was a sort of shiny brown translucent coat wherever it was applied, and maybe 1 or 2 dark orange splotches where it was applied a little more liberally. What gives? Did I miss something? I was hoping I could call it there for the terrain, but being wholly let down by the rust effect, I decided the only course of action remaining for me to get these parts looking suitably grim for the tabletop would be to douse them all in oil. I mixed up roughly equal parts ivory black and burnt umber oil paints with mineral spirits and just absolutely drowned these parts in it before jumping on my computer to continue writing this script while I waited for those parts to dry a bit. In my experience, you typically don't have to wait very long. Around 30 to 40 minutes is usually sufficient, and then coming back in with a microfiber cloth dampened with spirits, you can just wipe away a bunch of the pigments, and what you're left with is a really filthy, abandoned, and decaying looking effect. And at this point, these ruins, for me, are done. To finish off the trench rig, I took a similar approach, only this time using some pre-made stuff from AK Interactive. Chronologically, I actually did this before I washed the terrain, but had I done it the other way around, I would have just used the leftover oil wash on this guy, because the dark brown wash here is more or less exactly the same as the oil stuff. By the way, you can score these huge tubes of oil paint for steep discounts during back-to-school sales. At least here in Australia anyway, so keep an eye out. Same as before, once that wash had dried for a half hour or so, I used a microfiber cloth with a little bit of mineral spirits to wipe away the excess. And to reuse this cloth, I simply wash it thoroughly with dish soap when I'm done with it. With that step now having thoroughly worked its filthy magic on this Mini, the last thing I wanted to do was just bring up the brightness of those green armor panels. And to do this, I grabbed 2 Vallejo paints, lemon yellow and foul green, and I mixed some of that yellow into the green to make it brighter and more intense. I then applied this roughly to the armor panels, trying not to let my brush go all the way up to the edges or panel lines. After a pass of these rough highlights, I spiked that foul green with even more lemon yellow and repeated the same thing, only this time concentrating my brushwork in an even tighter area per panel. I really love the effect that this has on the miniature, and what's cool is it's a super quick technique to do as well. It felt like it didn't even take 5 minutes to do both of these steps. And I think at this point I had decision fatigue because I just went straight to blacking out that base rim and called it done there. And you know what? That's totally okay. I gotta say, I'm extremely impressed with this K1C, but I honestly think it might be overkill if you just want something to spit out terrain all day. My understanding is this thing is more targeted at makers who want to print in different materials like carbon fiber filaments and that sort of thing. For me, in my experience, provided a machine has come from factory without any issues, a simple bed slinger with automatic leveling, a filament runout sensor, and a flex sheet has made for a great filament printing experience. Where this machine shines is definitely the speed, but Creality not giving us a balls-to-the-wall profile out of the box is a little disappointing. Speaking of which, I never did get a reply at the time of writing this part of the script, but I did do some research and asked around, and eventually tried poking around in Orca Slicer and copying some speed settings that I saw, but I could only get the benchy down to 23 minutes after all this poking around and head scratching. And I suppose my benchmark for speed now will remain the FL Sun V400, because the profile that came with that thing can slice a benchy in just 20 minutes. I personally don't care to get lost down this boat-shaped hole any further. Like I said earlier, I just want everything to come with the printer that I need ready to go and just work. And if I ignore that 16-minute benchy that Creality teased me with earlier, this is a very impressive machine indeed. Some final details to include here that I forgot earlier that might be of interest to you. You can't drag and drop print files into this web-based UI like you can other Clipper machines, which is a minor annoyance. There's a webcam for live monitoring, which is awesome. The build plate is a smooth, flexible steel sheet, and Creality include a glue stick with this printer and direct you to apply a layer of glue before printing in PLA. Now, in my experience, I've always got the best bed adhesion with FDM printing, whether it's glass, textured PEI, and now this too, by wiping the bed down with 99% alcohol before each print. And I had excellent bed adhesion here doing just that. Finally, something I thought was really awesome was the inclusion of these STLs for replacement parts. Sure, STL files aren't the best, but this is better than nothing, and I couldn't help but feel a little, I don't know, there's something amazing about a product coming with the files to print replacement parts. It reminds me of old school electronics that all came with wiring diagrams. I used the air filter STL to really quickly and easily marry the K1C to my Fume extraction system, and you can of course download this for yourself for free right now on MakerWorld, and I'll leave a link to that down below, as well as an affiliate link for the K1C if you decide to pick one up after seeing this video, as that's a nice easy way to support the channel at no extra cost to you. I would however say maybe wait, because we're going to be looking at the brand new Creality Ender 3 V3 really soon, and the Bamboo Lab A1 Mini. Both of which look like very compelling options for our hobby. And you know what else is down there in that video description? Links to support this channel and get yourself some sweet perks. That's right, this channel is staying afloat by your direct support through Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon, and YouTube memberships. And I'm so grateful to each and every one of you who was able to chip in. This form of monetization I think is just so much better for everyone versus stuffing the videos with sponsored messages. Not that I won't still take one or two of those from time to time when the right opportunity presents itself, but just that steady income is really taking the edge off for me. and has made making these videos fun again. And yeah, I can't thank you all enough. I'm of course doing as much as possible to jam-pack that membership full of value for you, and the support from the artists in the community to help make it even more valuable has just been amazing too, so I want to thank all of them also, and again, urge you to just give them all a follow using the links in the video description. That's going to do it for this one. Oh, and don't forget, we're doing a print and paint right now, so pick whatever models you want from this month, print them up, paint them, and I'll share them here on the channel later this month. Alright, see you back here again really soon with the K1C again, and a 3D scanner, maybe? So I almost forgot to let you know about the fan noise. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm just running off a model here. 1 second. So here we go. I'm standing beside the printer right now. The camera is about a meter away, a little under a meter. I'm drifting for some reason. Obviously it's louder with the door open. Yeah, so we've got the fan actually locked now at 70% from changing those settings. So it's a nice, stable sound. And the reason I chose 70% and not 100% is because 100% sounds like a friggin' demon. So 70% is about the limit for me of how loud I'd want this thing in my studio. So I'm quite happy with this. And the main thing obviously is going to be, does that 70% fan speed affect the print quality? So we're printing up that fairy model from Caleb Makes Minis, also available this month. And yeah, we'll see how that looks. Also, the supports tool in Creality's slicer was actually pretty awesome, like the manual supports. It took, well, so far it was awesome. It took maybe a minute to add supports to this, and yeah, we'll see how they turn out. Okay, that's looking pretty stringy. Shit. But if we ignore the strings and, oh yes. Oh, just removed the stuff, I think. Yeah, that's what I was talking about with these supports being completely encapsulating. There's a staff in there, but yeah, not bad. What was I gonna say?